Hello again. This is Satan's Trilogy, Book 1, Chapter 6, Reading 44. I am the author and the narrator. I hope you enjoy this. Esther lay in bed just having awakened. It was 4 a.m., and Esther was wide awake, rested, and ready to start the day. Seldom needing more than 4 hours of sleep, Esther was planning her day. After a few minutes, she sat up and looked about her room. This is really nice, she thought to herself. This is a real home, an address that belonged to her and Aunt Brandy. Esther had never known in her short life of 18 years an address that was her own. It was a feeling that she liked. Esther had spent a great deal of her life traveling, and seldom did that involve staying somewhere more than a few weeks. If she wasn't traveling with her father, then Esther was in one of the 5 monasteries that her father had entrusted her well-being. Esther's dad made friends easily, and they were lifelong friends that often shared a bond with him. The monks of the monasteries had all cared for Esther, but their living conditions were frugal. Growing up, Esther always shared her living quarters with others. None of that bothered Esther. She thoroughly enjoyed her life and the experiences found on a day-to-day basis. A memory of her teacher, Master Zhao, came to Esther. He had asked Esther when she was very young, "I wonder if the caterpillar that awakens a butterfly is surprised." Esther felt she now had the answer. The caterpillar must have been surprised, and then its life went on. Esther sat up in bed. First, the body must be exercised. After changing into shorts and a t-shirt, Esther moved to the other bedroom and lit a small candle that she placed in the far corner of the room. Going to the center of the room, Esther collected her thoughts and then released them. Now, with her mind cleansed, she focused on her morning exercise in Kung Fu. With speed and confidence, she moved herself about the room while fighting invisible opponents. Her movements increased in speed and delivery until it became a blur, and had someone been watching, they wouldn't have believed their eyes. A few seconds before her timer went off on the cell phone, Esther had positioned herself in the center of the room and was finished. An hour of exercise twice a day would help keep Esther at her peak. She felt with extra effort and concentration, she would not lose the focus and sharpness her father had insisted she keep. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Esther softly said to herself, "My hair must be growing faster than ever before. I've got to have this cut." Releasing the long strands of hair that she had pulled off her shoulders, Esther was already thinking about a new style of cut, something more suited for Chicago breezes and her new life. Tossing her clothes into the basin, Esther sat on the toilet for a moment. "I am really getting spoiled," Esther thought to herself. For at least half of her life, the luxury of a toilet, let alone a toilet seat, was non-existent. Life had been simple, very simple. As she entered the shower, she turned to view her dragon. Esther thought of the village people that had given her this gift. Sometimes the poorest people are the most generous, she thought to herself. Working some shampoo into her hair, Esther again thought to herself, I have to get this hair cut today. She then finished her shower. Opening her closet, Esther grabbed some fitted blue jeans and a copper-colored silk blouse with a sparse bamboo pattern on it. Underneath, she would wear a sports bra. The mornings on the bike had been a bit brisk, and her new calfskin jacket would keep her warm. It had a yellow silk lining. Esther would be able to wear her jacket and feel comfortable. Esther had made it a habit to wear her biker's boots, as she called them, and changed into her dress shoes at school. Grabbing a pair of copper-colored leather shoes, Esther placed them into her backpack and started for the front door. Placing her bag at the doorway, she would grab it on the way out of the apartment. Now, going to the kitchen, Esther had planned on surprising Aunt Brandy for breakfast with a meal that her father had expressed they loved as kids. Eggs over easy on toast, some crisp bacon, and country-style grits. First, Esther started the coffee. Jamaican, of course. She wanted the entire house to smell like the freshly roasted coffee that screams breakfast. After placing a cast-iron skillet on the stove, Esther started to dice some peppers and onion. Quickly moving for a pan, Esther prepared some water for the grits. Brandy would be wakening in about 20 minutes, and Esther planned to have breakfast ready. Esther had prepared many meals for her father and his friends. She understood that timing the various elements to plate them at once was the first step in satisfying others. Then the food must taste good. A combination of seasonings to excite the palate, and correctly cooking the food was critical. People seldom enjoyed a meal if the dishes were not presented together. Good morning, Esther. Brandy had a large smile on her face. Breakfast smells so wonderful. I could smell the food in my bedroom. Let me tell you, I seldom get out of bed before my alarm clock goes off, but since you started spoiling me with these great meals, I am excited to get out of bed and enjoy your cooking. Esther walked up to Brandy, offering her a morning cup of Jamaican coffee, which was a morning ritual between the two of them. Brandy took a sip. Oh my God, this is so good. Esther grinned. That's because it is Jamaican coffee. There is none better. Brandy did a slight giggle and then commented, Esther, this coffee and your cooking is the only way to start a day. I am happy and satisfied the entire day because of your cooking. Brandy had made her way to the breakfast table and waited as usual for Esther to describe what was on the morning's menu. And Brandy, Dad told me that as kids, the two of you loved a very special breakfast menu. Eggs over easy on toast, grits, and crisp bacon. I've simply added a bit of seasoning to enhance the flavors to the palate. Esther smiled as she sat down and reached for her glass of orange juice. Brandy was already grabbing her fork and knife and cutting up the eggs and toast. She loved to cut the bacon into bits and enjoy them with her egg. The grits had diced red pepper in them, not many, just enough to enhance their appearance and add some flavor. Green peppers had been diced and cooked alongside the eggs, then dropped on the whole wheat toast that Esther had prepared in the oven. The sliced bread was too large for Brandy's toaster. Esther made certain not to cook more than they could eat, and yet enough to satisfy their appetites. Having finished their meals, both relaxed in their chairs for a bit of morning conversation. And Brandy, this is the night that my sister Day is going to sleep over. She is going to show me how to help at her father's grocery store on Saturday. But that won't be until 9 a.m., so if you want, we can still have breakfast. Esther watched her aunt for a response. It would be wonderful, Esther. Brandy then added, Dr. Song has been asking me to have dinner with him, and I finally accepted. You girls can have the place to yourself until I get back. Might be late, Brandy said with some uncertainty. And Brandy, I only met him once, but I liked him. He seems really interested in you. I know that it took your disinterest in him to awaken his feelings, but I really feel that he is looking for a lasting relationship with you. Esther looked at her aunt and asked, Do you think you are ready for a real relationship? Surprised by the direction of the conversation, Brandy felt comfortable enough to answer the question honestly. I don't know, Esther. Everything in my life has changed for the better, and I don't know if I want a relationship with him. I don't know whether I want a relationship with any man. Brandy looked at Esther and smiled. It's a good feeling, Esther, having a life that satisfies and complete without being involved in a relationship with someone. Brandy smiled. I'll see tonight how things go. Can I help with cleanup? Brandy asked, knowing that Esther preferred working in the kitchen alone. Thanks for asking, but please go ahead and get ready for work. I'll clean up and prepare for school. Esther smiled and leaned over to kiss Brandy on the cheek. You'll be home tonight after work? Before your date? Esther asked. I really want you to meet my sister. I think that you'll love her. Esther waited for a response. Esther, I wouldn't miss it for all the tea in China. Brandy laughed at herself and how clever she was to include Esther's country of origin in her response. And Brandy, that's a lot of tea. Esther laughed, and the two girls parted to prepare for the day. Esther cleaned the kitchen, washed and dried the dishes, organized the kitchen a bit more to her satisfaction, then scanned the apartment. Esther applied a small amount of makeup, brushed her hair, and read the Beijing Daily for about 18 minutes, all before Brandy came out of her side of the apartment ready for work. Esther jumped up from the kitchen table and grabbed a lunchbox that she had purchased for her aunt. And Brandy found this lunchbox at Ho's grocery store and thought, I could use it to give you lunches during the week. Hope you like it. Esther smiled and offered Brandy the lunchbox. It was small, the size of a child's lunchbox, with scenes of China painted on the sides. Brandy looked at the box, then looked at Esther's smiling face. Brandy was quickly touched by the thought and her niece's eagerness to provide for her. Brandy held back her emotions and asked, Esther, what did you prepare for me? Brandy asked, smiling with a surge of enthusiasm. Esther responded, I know that you don't want a large lunch, so I put half a sandwich inside with a pear. I think that you will love the sandwich. If you place a sandwich and pear in the refrigerator at work and keep the thermos out, you have hot Jamaican coffee and a wonderful meal at lunchtime. And Brandy, I made the sandwich especially for you. I hope you love it. Esther smiled as Brandy took the lunchbox. Esther, you have not disappointed me, even in the slightest, with food preparations. I doubt that this will be an exception. I am actually looking forward to lunch now. Brandy took the lunchbox and gave Esther a hug, then left for work, saying on the way out the door, I'll see you tonight, Esther. Looking about the apartment, Esther canvassed the surroundings, making a mental note on where everything was positioned. This was her morning practice. Should someone enter the apartment while she and Brandy were gone, she might be able to realize this by spotting something out of place. Esther then put her jacket on and grabbed her backpack and helmet and walked out the door. The ride to school seemed to get shorter as Esther became familiar with the streets and adjusted to the various sights. Pulling into the school's parking lot, John and his buddies were there waiting for Esther. For John and crew, it had become their practice to arrive before Esther and to walk into school with her. John and crew didn't offer a lot of conversation, just a good morning to Esther. Yet a bond was developing between the four ninja riders, and while unspoken, it was real. "Hey, Esther. How you doing this morning?" John asked. Esther was pleased to see John and his buddies. She wanted them to finish the semester and go on to some type of higher education, no matter what career path they chose. "Hi, John. It's good to see you guys. It's Friday. Do you have your weekend planned?" Esther asked with sincere interest. "We'll probably go to a movie and then do some studying. We have to work to get that C average, but I think we can do it. I'm not certain where it will lead us, but with someone paying the bills, I am more than willing to find out." "What are you doing this weekend?" John asked with some real interest. "Day is staying the night at my apartment, and in the morning she is going to teach me how to help at our father's grocery store." Esther could see that John was puzzled. "It's not that uncommon in the Far East to take someone into your family. They and I are sisters now," Esther explained. Esther could see that John was slightly confused. "So anyway, I want to help our father at the store. He offers quality items at fair prices, and he provides a great service to the community at this location. This is a fantastic opportunity for me because I know Mr. Ho is very knowledgeable about fresh foods, and I need that knowledge to become a great chef. So it's a win-win for everyone, and besides, when Day took me as her sister, Mr. Ho accepted me as his daughter. I know people, and Mr. Ho is a very remarkable man. If you look closely, you may understand what I mean." Esther looked at John and commented, "The day we met, you saw me in a special way that few can see. John, you can size people up quickly, and that's a gift. When you start thinking about a career, you might consider how your gift might benefit you in some job positions." Everyone slowly made it through the front door, waiting patiently for the guards and teachers to search and scan their possessions. "Hey, John. I'll see you guys later." Esther took off for her locker at the far end of the hallway. John had developed a bit of a big brother attitude towards Esther and watched her as she walked away. As Esther walked down the hall, John noticed that 6 Chinese students started to follow her. John grabbed his friends and quickly told them, "There might be trouble. Let's follow Esther." Everyone was eager to comply. School had been boring for the entire week, and this was something that might lead to some excitement. John followed the 6 students from a short distance. The hallway was crowded, and he didn't need to worry about being detected. There were students walking about in all directions. When Esther reached her locker, one of the Chinese students approached her. Esther was aware of his presence and decided to ignore him for the moment. Leaning on the locker next to Esther's, he looked at Esther and began to speak in Chinese. "Understand you have some ink on your back, a dragon. My friends and I would like to see it." Turning to the young Chinese student, Esther smiled at him. He was no taller than Esther and perhaps weighed no more. Esther could tell he was athletic and most likely was trained in martial arts. With a large smile, not offered as a gesture of confidence, but of friendship, Esther spoke to him in Chinese. Someday, I may show you my dragon, but not today, and not tomorrow or even this year, but perhaps someday, at a time not yet determined. Dropping the Chinese and addressing Esther in English, he became somewhat impatient. So you speak Chinese. That doesn't make you Chinese. Esther was slightly upset by his remark, and so she countered. I was born in China. That makes me Chinese. Where were you born? Showing some anger at her remark, he managed to control his emotions, then continued to express his intentions. Gesturing to one of his friends in the crowded hallway, a very large young Chinese student stepped forward. Esther judged him to be at least several inches over 6 feet. He carried some extra weight, but still he looked very fit, and Esther could tell by the way he moved. If necessary, he could be quick. My friend Z is going to hold you while the rest of us look at your dragon. He seemed confident in what was about to happen. Esther stood tall and looked at him before expressing her thoughts. You are Yu Pai. The school's website says that you are an artist. What you are suggesting has nothing to do with art. Without looking towards the large student, she continued, Your friend's name is W.O.W. The school's website says he wants to be a teacher. If he were to do this, he would hurt his future. Yu wasn't moved by Esther's comments. He was only interested in seeing the dragon. I think that I can reason with Z, and he'll not help you, Esther stated. Laughing hard, Yu Pei said, Z does whatever I ask. If you can keep him from doing this, then I'll walk away. No, Esther said. If Z chooses not to do as you ask, then you must grant me one wish. Esther looked at Yu Pei to see if he would agree. Done. You're such a foolish girl. If Z chooses to do as I ask, then you will agree to my touching the dragon. Yu leaned slightly back and seemed confident, waiting for Esther to respond. Very well, but I must be allowed to speak with Z before you have him grab me. Esther added as she approached the tall student, Z.J.O.B. Walking up to this tall student, Esther stopped just a foot away from him, and she started to speak in Chinese. Z.J.O.B., you are Chinese. You were born in China, as I was. Your father left China with his family because he heard a better life was possible in this country. His parents would not leave China. Z seemed somewhat puzzled at how Esther was able to know these things. Esther realized that Z was listening to her story and swiftly continued in Chinese. My father spent much time in China as a soldier. The government had a problem with rebels that hid in the mountains. I was with my father when he reached a small village in Qinling Mountains. A village had been plundered and the villagers had been killed. Everyone except one, an old lady, had survived a gunshot wound. When I found her, she was near death. She had the kindest eyes, and she looked upon me as if she knew me. And I knelt by her side. She smiled and reached for my hand. Smiling at me, she spoke softly and said, I saw you coming. You are as beautiful as my vision of you was. I have seen so many things in my life. At times I am not certain if my gift is a blessing or a curse. Esther had been focusing on Z's face while telling her story. Esther continued. She stopped talking. Her breath was weak, and then spoke again. When I die, my gift will be yours. I only ask that you meet my grandson, that when you meet my grandson, you tell him I love him. And in Chinese, Esther says, she soon passed on, and her hand slowly slipped away from mine. We later identified her as Chen W.O.W. Z was closely listening to Esther's story, but when he heard the name Chen W.O.W., he lost all expression and became pale. In Chinese, Esther said, Z, I believe this old woman was your grandmother. She gave me a gift that helps me understand the world. In essence, this woman was everyone's grandmother, and she didn't deserve to die that way. Esther paused. Recounting the story had affected her emotions. Raising her head slightly and looking at Z square on, Esther reached her hand out to Z, and in Chinese said, Z, your grandmother held my hand and spoke of you in her last breath. Take my hand. Z stood motionless, then raised his right hand and softly took Esther's hand into his. In Chinese, Esther said, Z, your grandmother's last thoughts were of you. She loves you with all her heart. Z heard his grandmother speaking to him and felt his grandmother's hand in his. Z went to his knees and continued to hold Esther's hand. He had a vision. His grandmother was smiling at him, telling him that he would be a great man one day. Z looked up at Esther. He was smiling. Esther said, I apologize for my behavior. Please forgive me. My behavior was not proper and would have disgraced my family. You have opened my eyes to the world around me. Z, you are forgiven. To fulfill an old woman's last wish is a true blessing. It is something of a miracle that we could meet on the other side of the world, and that your grandmother had foreseen this. Esther smiled and offered both hands to help Z back to his feet. Z seemed to stand taller than before, and he appeared to have matured from his vision initiated by the touch of Esther's hand. Looking at his friends, Z spoke to you. Esther is my friend. No one is to touch her. Z looked at you and made it clear with his gaze that Esther was to be left alone. The 6-minute bell rang, and students started to disappear from the hallway. Esther rushed to her locker to grab her bag. Yu was still standing there, hardly believing what had just happened. Looking at Esther, but with a different attitude, Yu asked, So what is the wish you have? Esther slammed her locker closed. I spoke with my uncle this morning. He tells me that business is so good at his restaurant that he needs more dishwashers and busboys. I want you and your friends to work for my uncle for 1 month. He is paying better than minimum wage and offers free meals. I suspect you'll want to stay after a month has gone by, and I'm seldom wrong. Hugh looked angered, having lost with Esther. Fine, 1 month, and we'll see if you are right in 1 month's time. Esther smiled at you. Good. You will honor your word. My uncle will be expecting you tonight at 4 o'clock. He'll help you choose the best hours for your schedule. So what is your uncle's name? That will give us jobs, asked you. Uncle Hung is owner of Chinese restaurant Sha Ten Cuisine. Esther smiled with pride. Yu Pei looked stunned. His jaw dropped slightly, and then realized that his actions had been unworthy. Esther Saint, I apologize for my behavior. I approached you with force, and you welcomed me with warmth. Shoten cuisine is the pride of the Chinese community, and anyone would be honored to work there. Your uncle is highly respected by all. I will be there on time. You looked at his friends. Are we together on this? With unison, all five responded with a loud yes. Esther smiled as she broke away from you and his friends. Good. She had to rush to the next class. John and his friends had been close by. They didn't understand exactly what had happened, but they did realize that Esther had come out on top in another confrontation, and without raising a finger. John felt some pride in what he considered his little sister had accomplished. And we'll stop there. Again, that's Book 1 of Satan's Trilogy, and Chapter 6, and Reading 44. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, take care. Thank you for viewing.